This man has single-handedly confronted the entire Italian Mafia, but he has no idea what these people are capable of. It's the Equalizer 3. Ready? Let's go. The events of the movie take place in Italy. A grey-haired man in a hat and a dark-skinned boy drive up to a house and find many bodies on the ground. A guy with a rifle stands at the door. The grey-haired man takes a gun out of the glove compartment, asks the boy to stay in the car and goes into the house. There are many bodies inside as well. The grey-haired man takes off his hat and goes down to the wine cellar. There he meets the main character, Robert, who is taken hostage by several guards. Robert notices a black key on his belt. He starts a timer on the watch, after which he sends everyone to the afterlife, takes the key from the grey-haired man and leaves. Outside, the same boy in the car shoots at him and runs away. Robert realizes that he is wounded. With his last strength, he gets into the car and drives away from the winery. The protagonist is soon found on the road in a critical condition and taken to the hospital. A doctor finds a gunshot wound on his back and removes the bullet. Robert regains consciousness and tries to get up, but the doctor stops him, as he is still too weak. The doctor gives him some soup and tells him his name, Enzo. A few days later, Robert walks outside, leaning on his cane. He meets Enzo in the garden. The doctor examines his wound and says that he will be fine. Robert is going out to explore the city. He walks down the stairs and comes to a square with many cameras. The man enters a cafe, sits down at a table and orders tea. However, they bring him coffee. Soon, Robert is approached by a man who found him barely alive on the road. It turns out that he is a policeman. The cop gives the protagonist the keys to his car and leaves. A phone call rings in the CIA's financial services office. It's Robert. He gives someone's address, but the operator hangs up. The man calls one more time and repeats the address. 55 boxes of wine from Syria have been delivered to this location. This is very suspicious and sounds like smuggling. The operator finds the location using a satellite and sends a task force there. Robert walks through a narrow passage and knocks a cane on the ground. Then he returns home and goes to bed. Unfortunately, some distressing memories from the past don't let him sleep. The next day, the man has lunch at a local restaurant and then goes to another cafe, drinks coffee there and meets a waitress named Amina. In the next scene, we see some guy demanding money from the fish store owner. Robert hears the sound of fighting, stops but doesn't intervene. The gangster and his friends leave on motorcycles, and Robert stares after them. The brother of one of the gangsters is trying to buy an apartment in Naples to build a hotel. The tenants refuse to sell their house. Then, the criminal throws the old man living there out of the window, putting a rope around his neck beforehand. Robert has a dinner with Enzo, and in the morning he buys fish at the local store. The vendor gives him the fish for free, as he is a friend of Enzo's. Meanwhile, the task force arrives at the very winery where numerous bodies were found. There they discover contraband of illegal substances hidden in the wine bottles, as well as weapons and a lot of money. Enzo removes Robert's stitches. The protagonist doesn't understand why the doctor didn't call the police when he saw his wound. Enzo replies that he didn't because he thinks Robert is a good man. The main character packs his belongings and is about to leave the doctor's house. In the evening, he hears bells ringing outside and spots a crowd of people running away. An old man with a bell runs down the street and shouts that the fish store is on fire. The owner of the store, Angelo, shouts and cries, cursing whoever did it. Some of the locals do their best to put out the fire, while others just stand by and watch. Robert notices a suspicious man in the distance and stares at him intently. The protagonist goes to the church to pray and decides to postpone his departure. The next day, Robert and other townspeople help clean up the store after the fire. The policeman who rescued Robert is reviewing the surveillance footage and sees someone approaching the fish store and setting it on fire. He searches for information about the owner of the car. In the evening, Robert goes to the cafe again. Amina asks him about his personal life and wants to treat the man to local cuisine. There is only one condition: he should wear a hat. It turns out that Amina has owned this cafe for over 20 years. She and Robert walk along the waterfront and buy a kebab in one of the street food stalls. We see that this town lives a fairly carefree life. The children go to school and greet Enzo. People are smiling and cheerful. Everyone knows each other. Robert is sitting in the cafe, watching a silent movie with other customers. Some old lady gives him a yellow apple. Amina says that the locals consider him one of them. On one such sunny day, a woman named Emma Collins shows up at the cafe. She is a CIA agent, and she is the one whom Robert gave the address of the criminals. The woman sits down at his table and wants to find out who he is and what he was doing at that winery. The man replies that he was just passing by. Emma threatens him with an arrest, but Robert is not intimidated. The woman demands that he stay in town and then leaves. The police officer in charge of the arson case receives an anonymous call saying that his daughter had left school earlier. The teacher informs him that the girl was picked up by one of the officers. The frightened cop rushes home. There he finds a group of gangsters who have taken his wife and daughter hostage. He gets hit with a baton and falls down. His daughter screams. One of the thugs beats up the cop, then grabs the girl and says that she will be next if the cop doesn't close the arson case. The gangsters walk away, leaving the family alone. The policeman goes to see Enzo and the doctor stitches him up. Seeing Robert, the cop silently walks away. The protagonist asks who did it, and Enzo admits that it was the local mafia. Robert meets Emma Collins again. The woman hasn't managed to find anything about his past, which means that he's cleared of all suspicion. Emma says that she must find the other criminals from the winery, and Robert offers his help. In the evening, the policeman and his family have dinner at a restaurant. The very same bandits walk into the place, and the smile immediately fades on the cop's face. They sit down next to him and demand that he go to the Somalis and ask them for boats. The cop is silent, and the gangsters notice Robert, who is having dinner at the same cafe. He gets up and sits down at the table with the protagonist, telling him to mind his own business. Robert warns that he is better not to anger him, after which he sharply twists the gangster's arm. The guy screams in pain and asks his sidekicks to leave the place. Robert demands the thug to put his gun on the table, after which he releases his hand. The criminal immediately runs out of the restaurant. Outdoors, the mobsters decide what to do with Robert. Some of them get into a car and wait for him to leave the restaurant, while the others stand near the entrance. One of the criminals is suddenly hit by their own car. Obviously, there is no one alive inside. The two surviving gangsters run to the car, and at that point, Robert shows up with a bottle in his hand and knocks out one of them. The leader is the only one left. He pulls out a knife from his shoe and lunges at Robert. However, the protagonist quickly sends him into the afterlife. The next day, the police find the bodies of the mobsters. Their car was loaded with illegal substances. The policeman whom they had blackmailed earlier also arrives at the scene. Meanwhile, in Rome, a group of Syrian militants set off an explosion at a train station. The CIA can't find them, but Emma Collins is sure that the criminals should be sought in Naples. The woman goes to the chief of the police with a request to interrogate some prisoners. Having received the necessary information, she sends the special forces team to one of the Italian villas, which immediately clears out the building. In the meantime, the funeral of one of the mobsters is being held. It turns out that his older brother is the leader of the most influential branch of the Italian Mafia, and naturally he wants to avenge his relative. The chief of police visits him and says that the CIA has arrived to find the criminals who are sending illegal substances to Europe. We find out that there are no Syrian militants. All criminal affairs in the city are handled by the local mafia. The police chief is afraid that they will be exposed and calls the mafia leader a barbarian. Because of this, this, he is immediately captured and punished with a knife. The wounded man is warned that they will behave more violently next time. The CIA gets a report of an attack on the police chief, and Emma plans to pay him a visit. She receives a call from Robert informing her that she is dealing with the Italian Mafia and should be more careful. The woman heads to her car, however it explodes. She manages to survive but ends up in the hospital. Before the surgery, Emma manages to inform her partner about the local mafia. Meanwhile, the mobsters assemble a large group and attack the policeman and his family again. They demand the name of the man who killed the gangsters near the restaurant and even promise a reward for it. All the residents of the neighborhood gather in the square. Tension mounts. Suddenly, Robert's voice comes from afar. The protagonist admits that they are looking for him. He comes out to the mobsters with a gun in his hands. The man is ready to sacrifice himself, on the condition that the gangsters leave the locals in peace. Robert puts the weapon down on the ground. He raises his hand while the priest embraces him. A gunshot sounds. We see Enzo reloading his rifle and aiming at the crime boss. The locals capture everything on their phone and stand for Robert. The mobsters can't do anything and leave. The next night, Robert sneaks into the Italian Mafia's estate, eliminates the guards, then cuts the electricity to the entire house and uses a fire poker to deal with several more mobsters. The Mafia leader is lying in bed when he realizes that something red is dripping from a stained glass window on the ceiling. In a moment, someone's body falls into his room. He grabs a gun and runs around the estate looking for his sidekicks, but there is nothing he can do to help them. Before long, Robert knocks him out, ties him up, and doses him with a large amount of illegal substances. The mobster regains consciousness and starts crying. Robert says that in 6 minutes the man's life will be cut short, and then unties the criminal. The mafioso crawls around the room and then makes his way outside. Robert follows him and witnesses the criminal being hit by a car before he is sent to the afterlife. The Italian Mafia is subjected to a series of arrests. Robert visits Emma in the hospital and brings her a bag full of money. It is the stolen pension of an ordinary bricklayer named Greg Dreyer, stolen during a cyber attack. After a while, Emma visits Greg and returns the bag to him. The man has worked for this money all his life, therefore he is incredibly happy. Emma receives a promotion for successfully solving the case. Robert stays with Enzo. He seems to like the merry life in Italy. This is where he is willing to face his old age. Liking and subscribing to the channel gives you plus 10 points to your defense against the Mafia. This was the Movie Cat. I'll see you later, friends.